Who is the greatest chess player of all time? Chess is over 1,500 years old, and we have seen the rise and fall of thousands of grandmasters.
Oh my god, oh, come on, Matt. Come on, wake up, you stupid Matt.
But who dominated chess the most, and at what time? Philidor was basically the first guy who made people realize that structure in chess is important. Back in his time, most players were all about sacrifices and quick checkmates. Philidor then said something that's still famous today. The pawns are the soul of chess. What he meant is that pawns aren't just small pieces. They shape the entire game. They control space, create weaknesses, and decide where your pieces can go. That idea was super ahead of its time, and today, pawn structure is a thing we all know. Even 300 years later, he still has his own defense move, called the Philidor defense. I'll let Gotham explain this to you.
It's a rook endgame and white is up a pawn. If black doesn't know what they're doing, white is going to push the pawn, trade the rooks, make a queen, and win the game. But in this position, black has a secret trick called the Philidor defense. Before the pawn crosses the 6th rank, black has to go here. This prevents the white king from going forward, and the second the pawn moves up, the rook zips around to the other side. And if the king advances, black gives checks forever, and white makes no progress, and the game is a draw. If white does this, black just brings the king, and white still makes no progress at all.
He basically introduced ideas that shaped how chess is played today. Without him, modern chess would probably look very different. Morphy is one of those players who feels almost like an engine when playing. He played super fast and always went straight for the king. Back then, that wasn't standard at all. He made it look effortless. He wasn't playing for a good position and good endgame. His opponents would fall apart in like 20 to 30 moves every game. Back then, tournaments were not really a big thing, but sometimes they did happen. The American Chess Congress in 1857 was one of the first major tournaments in the US, and definitely the biggest event in America at that time. The only major tournament Paul ever competed in, which he didn't just win, he dominated. Philidor was more like the guy who figured the game out. What matters in good and clean chess? Morphy was the guy who just shows up and destroys everyone without concepts. Fast development, open lines, direct attacks. Today, you can experience this playstyle when playing against an engine like Stockfish. Very scary. The 1857 tournament was kind of his way of proving a point. He entered, won it convincingly, and established himself as the best in America. After that, he went to Europe and beat the strongest players there too. And once he did that, he just lost interest. Wilhelm Steinitz is where chess starts to feel a lot more disciplined. With Philidor, you had the first real ideas about structure. With Morphy, you had fast attacking and offensive chess. But Steinitz is the guy who basically said, you can't just play on instinct. There are rules behind this. He basically introduced that you don't just attack because you feel like it. You attack because the position allows it. And if it doesn't, then you defend, improve your pieces, and wait. At the time, people actually thought his style looked passive or even wrong, but he kept winning, even to a point where he won the first official World Chess Championship in 1886. What makes him the first official World Chess Champion with holding the title for 8 years? And eventually, everyone had to accept that this boring way of playing was just better. He also has his own opening, the Steinitz defense. That is a trap for Magnus Carlsen's favorite opening, the Ruy Lopez. White starts with pawn to e4, black mirrors with e5. White wants to put pressure on the pawn and plays knight to f3. Black defends the pawn with knight to c6. White attacks the knight on c6, which is defending e5. So indirectly, white is increasing pressure on the center. This is the Ruy Lopez. With pawn to e6, you are now in the Steinitz defense. A pretty basic move, as that is the whole vibe of Wilhelm Steinitz. Some people say Jose Raul Capablanca was the first ever Magnus Carlsen. Because he was especially famous for his endgame skill. Like, ridiculously good. He played for a small advantage or even a completely equal position, and then completely beat you in a perfect endgame. He just knew where his pieces belonged to play a perfect endgame. That's why a lot of people say he had one of the best natural understandings of chess ever. He became world chess champion in 1921 by beating Emanuel Lasker. And at that point, Lasker had been champion for 27 years. So that was a huge deal. Mikhail Tal is a name you've probably already heard. He played like he was starting a fire on the board every single game.
He finds all the moves nobody thinks of.
Tal was nowhere near perfect calculation or clean technique.
Tal was different. Tal was different. Different time, different player, different everything.
He was pure attacking instinct. He would sacrifice piece after piece in positions where most players wouldn't even consider it. Sometimes those sacrifices were objectively not even correct, but they worked because they created chaos. And Tal was a master of chaos. He trusted his intuition way more than concrete analysis. While others tried to prove every move, Tal would go,
"This feels dangerous. Let's go."
And suddenly your king is getting hunted and you don't even know how it happened. Please do not try this at home. People called him the magician from Riga for a reason. Watching his games feels less like studying chess and more like watching someone pull off tricks you don't fully understand. That's why higher rated people tell beginners to not study him until you are already a demon at the chessboard. Just enjoy his playstyle. Bobby Fischer is the first guy on our list people actively still call the GOAT of chess. Back then, he basically raised the standard for what great even means. In the late 1960s and early 70s, most top players were from the Soviet Union, and they dominated chess as a system. Fischer came in as a single American player and just crushed them. Not occasionally, consistently. At one point, he won 20 games in a row against world-class opponents. People called him the perfect player as his play style was super clean and precise. He also prepared way harder than others at the time, studying openings deeply and taking chess more seriously as a profession than most people did back then. The peak of his career was in 1972 when he became world champion by beating Boris Spassky. That match was a huge deal, not just in chess, but politically, because it was basically USA versus the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Fischer winning that match made him a global icon, but here's where things start to shift. After becoming world champion, Fischer became more and more difficult when it came to rules and conditions. He would argue over things like lighting, camera noise, audience movement, even the design of the chairs. Part of it came from how seriously he took the game, but his demands became bigger and bigger. He wanted to change the entire format of the World Championship. He pushed for a system where the match would be decided by the first player to reach a certain number of wins instead of a fixed number of games. He also didn't want draws to count at all. He wanted everyone to play for a win. When the chess organization didn't accept all of his conditions, he refused to play completely. And that's how he lost his title without even playing a match. But the iceberg goes even deeper. Over time, he became increasingly paranoid. Remember, this was the Cold War. He wasn't just a chess player, he was seen as a symbol. That kind of pressure can seriously mess with someone, and he started believing that governments and outside forces were actively working against him. The thing is, some of that attention was real. During the Cold War, the World Championship wasn't just a game, it had political weight. Governments were interested, but he would talk about things like devices being used against him or games being manipulated. There was never any real evidence for this, but in his mind, it felt completely real. And then there's the part a lot of people don't know. He actually ended up in jail later on. 1992, Bobby Fischer did not play a chess game for 20 years, but he ran out of money. He agreed to play a rematch against Boris Spassky in Yugoslavia, even though the US had strict sanctions against the country at the time. By going there, he broke US law. Years later, in 2004, he was then arrested in Japan because of that game. He spent months in jail before eventually being released. Garry Kasparov is one of those names that instantly feels bigger than the game itself. When people talk about chess GOATs, he's always right there in the conversation. And for a long time, he was the standard everyone else was compared to. His preparation was ridiculously deep, especially in openings, and he was constantly pushing the limits of what was considered possible over the board. Remember, back then, bots were not as good as humans, so he was the peak of chess. Another big thing is how dominant he was for such a long time. He became world champion in 1985 and basically stayed at the top of the chess world for 2 decades. That kind of consistency at the highest level is extremely rare. He was setting the pace for everyone else, forcing other top players to evolve just to keep up. And then there's his influence beyond just results. Kasparov was one of the first players to really embrace computers as part of training, which completely changed how chess is studied today. Plus, his matches, especially against machines, kind of symbolized this bigger moment where human intelligence was being challenged by technology, which made him even more iconic outside the chess world. If you watch chess even for 1%, you probably know Magnus Carlsen. He's basically the face of modern chess, the guy everyone ends up hearing about, whether you follow the game casually or not.
But why?
He became world chess champion in 2013 and held the title until 2023. And in 2023, he didn't even lose it. He just chose to give it up. He also reached the highest rating in chess history, 2,882, which is still unbeaten. And he's basically been world #1 since 2011. He's won multiple World Rapid and World Blitz championships. He also went 125 classical games without losing. He became a grandmaster at just 13 years old and was the youngest world #1 ever. He's one of the very few players to hold the #1 spot in all 3 formats at the same time. Do I even need to say more? He's the undisputed GOAT, the master of the endgame, and arguably the best player ever. I think you know Magnus by now, and if not, go do some research. Thanks for watching.